Should the supreme leader in Iran be worried right now?
I would say he should be very worried, yeah, he should be. As you know, they're negotiating with us.
Iran just got Trump's ultimatum, and the clock is ticking. The White House just sent what could be the most forceful message to Tehran in recent memory. And here's the reality. This no longer resembles traditional diplomatic language. This resembles a ticking time bomb. Pay close attention, because what's unfolding in Middle Eastern waters right now extends far beyond some regional dispute. Within the last 48 hours, two critical confrontations occurred. Iranian naval vessels moved to intercept a commercial shipping tanker, followed by a kamikaze-style drone tracking directly toward America's USS Abraham Lincoln carrier group before defensive systems eliminated it. These are precisely the escalation triggers that spiral into major crises before anyone realizes what's happening.
They were thinking about starting a new site in a different part of the country. We found out about it. I said, you do that, we're going to do very bad things to you.
Here's the situation. Trump's statement to Iran's top leadership left zero room for interpretation. During his NBC News sit-down, when questioned whether the Ayatollah faces genuine danger, Trump outlined Iran's ongoing negotiations with Washington and referenced their plans for establishing a new nuclear facility in an undisclosed location. His response? You do that, we're going to do really bad things to you. Those aren't carefully crafted diplomatic phrases. That's an ultimatum. And it arrives precisely as regional flashpoints reach critical mass. Let me walk you through the actual events from the past 2 days, because these developments signal serious danger ahead. Iranian maritime forces approached a merchant ship operating in international waters, with orders demanding it stop for inspection. You know what the vessel's captain did? Accelerated away from the threat. US naval assets responded and successfully drove the Iranian boats back. But the provocations didn't end there. Iran then deployed a single-use unmanned aerial vehicle, meaning it's built for one-way missions, designed exclusively to strike targets, not return to base on a direct intercept course with the USS Abraham Lincoln battle group. American defenses shot it down before target acquisition. We're talking about a suicide drone, people. The operational intent couldn't be clearer. Here's what's critical about this. These aren't random harassment incidents. This represents Iran systematically pressure testing American red lines and broadcasting strength right before planned diplomatic engagement. They're measuring response times, gauging commitment levels, and determining whether Washington will actually translate warnings into consequences.
The conflict. First off, 2 incidents happened 2 days ago. First off, the Iranian boats threatened a tanker. We have a merchant ship and was told to pull over. We're boarding you. You know what they did? They went faster straight ahead. You know what they got? Naval relief, and that fast boat was pushed away. And then they sent a Shahed drone. 500 was picked up heading towards USS Abraham Lincoln. It was knocked out of the sky. It's a one-way drone. They're almost on a suicide. They're suicide drones, not to come back. And it was knocked out of the sky. What was the point of that? We'll discuss it in a moment.
Hold on. The story gets considerably more complex. Because simultaneous with these military standoffs, diplomatic channels are supposedly opening. And that's where the real contradictions emerge. Negotiations are set for Oman, featuring Iran and the United States at the table. Initially, these discussions were planned for Turkey, with participation from Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. But the location shifted, the participant list contracted, and now it's strictly bilateral, just Tehran and Washington facing off. And here's the fundamental problem. They're not even attempting to negotiate identical objectives. Fox News Middle East analyst Benjamin Hall, whose regional expertise is extensive, points out that Iran has publicly declared their singular focus, the nuclear weapons program. Period. Everything else remains completely off limits in their view. Meanwhile, President Trump and his national security team, they're pushing for comprehensive discussions covering multiple threat categories. They want Iran's ballistic missile development program addressed, their financial and operational support for militant proxy networks throughout the region examined, plus accountability for how the Iranian government brutalizes its own citizens. Secretary of State Marco Rubio articulated this position explicitly. Meaningful negotiations must encompass the scope of Iran's ballistic missile capabilities, their backing of terrorist organizations, and their domestic human rights violations. Can you spot the fundamental disconnect? Iran arrives wanting to discuss one narrow topic. America arrives demanding 4 separate complex negotiations. That's not productive diplomacy. That's 2 nations having completely unrelated conversations in the same conference room. And when foundational objectives diverge this dramatically, negotiations don't just hit roadblocks. They detonate entirely. But the complications extend further. Let's discuss why this situation directly impacts your daily economic reality, because this transcends distant Middle Eastern geopolitics that supposedly don't touch American lives. This reaches straight into your bank account. Iran's most powerful leverage in this confrontation isn't military hardware, it's geographical positioning, specifically the Strait of Hormuz choke point. You need to grasp what this narrow passage represents. Approximately 1/5 of global petroleum supplies transit through this maritime bottleneck every 24 hours. It ranks among the planet's most strategically vital shipping corridors. The Fox News intelligence assessment indicates that if Iran successfully disrupts Strait of Hormuz traffic, even briefly, petroleum markets could spike toward $150 or potentially $200 per barrel. What's that mean for your household budget? Gasoline prices would become absolutely catastrophic. We're projecting $6, $7, potentially $8 per gallon, depending on your regional market. Inflation would surge dramatically. Stock markets would likely experience severe corrections. Your investment portfolios and retirement funds would suffer major losses. Transportation costs would explode upward, cascading price increases across every consumer category.
Who are the players in the region and what do they stand for? Well, there's going to be talks beginning today. They're going to take place in Oman. It's going to take place between Iran and the U.S. only. It was going to take place in Turkey, and it was going to have Egypt there and UAE and Saudi Arabia, perhaps, who is a rival of Iran. But all these countries have made it clear, at least publicly, they don't think we should be taking action in the region. They want us to go slowly and go into talks. And those talks are going to be discussing only one thing, and I don't think this is acceptable, their nuclear program.
Is Iran's strategic thinking. They calculate that generating this magnitude of economic disruption forces Trump into an impossible political position. They believe American consumers won't tolerate sustained fuel price shocks, particularly approaching electoral cycles. They're betting economic pain compels Washington toward negotiations on Tehran's preferred terms. But listen carefully, Trump's foreign policy team signals they won't buckle under economic coercion. The Fox analyst emphasized a crucial distinction. Trump won't get deceived the way the Obama administration was deceived. Whether you personally accept that characterization or reject it, that perspective drives current policy decisions. The present administration views the previous Iran nuclear agreement as fundamentally defective because it addressed too narrow a scope, completely ignored missiles and proxy militias, and granted Tehran excessive diplomatic leverage. Iran's economy is currently experiencing catastrophic failure. You're witnessing widespread domestic protests, economic devastation from comprehensive sanctions. The regime faces vulnerability unprecedented in decades. And that's precisely what makes this moment extraordinarily dangerous. Because cornered regimes become wildly unpredictable regimes. So what transpires when these Oman negotiations inevitably falter? And let's face reality, considering the agenda incompatibility we've outlined, productive outcomes seem highly improbable. What follows diplomatic breakdown? This is where military risk calculations intensify dramatically. American force projection spans the entire Middle East theater. We maintain substantial permanent installations in Qatar. We operate significant combat presence throughout Iraq. We position carrier battle groups dominating regional waters. And literally every single one of these forward deployed assets represents a viable target for Iranian counterstrikes. Benjamin Hall outlined the probable retaliation sequence. When America launches military operations against Iranian targets, Tehran responds by striking US military infrastructure across the region. They command proxy militia networks operating in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, and multiple other locations who can execute attacks while maintaining official deniability. They leverage these surrogate forces to hit American personnel without technically being the direct aggressor. The situation deteriorates further. The Fox News discussion touched on something exponentially more volatile, the regime change question. And this is where internal contradictions within the strategic conversation become starkly obvious. The Fox panelist floated the possibility that perhaps America could eliminate the Ayatollah, could neutralize Iranian Revolutionary Guard commanders, could remove critical leadership figures. The program host countered, asserting, "We don't seek regime overthrow. We don't want nation-building responsibilities. We don't want to become responsible for taking out the trash," as he characterized it. But here's the question nobody's willing to answer directly. When you're advocating for eliminating a nation's supreme leader, killing their top generals, removing their key political figures, how is that anything except regime change? You can rebrand it as precision strikes or limited operations endlessly. But decapitating a government's leadership structure is regime change, regardless of terminology. The Fox analyst proposed seeking fractures within Iran's power structure, identifying military commanders or political figures potentially cooperative with Washington, engineering conditions for internal governmental collapse rather than external military invasion. He cited 1979 when Iranian Air Force elements defected and contributed to toppling the Shah.
I think that the naval aspect is important because Iran's greatest weapon is still shutting the Strait of Hormuz. I think what they feel their greatest strength is if the U.S. attacks and they can shut the Strait of Hormuz, even temporarily, they can get oil prices up to $150, $200 a barrel. And at that point, they think President Trump might have to pull back. So what's happening in the Straits of Hormuz and the Navy, I think, is really critical right now. But yes, they're going to respond, first of all, by attacking missile bases in the U.S., or rather, U.S. bases in the region. And I think the U.S. is prepared for that. Israel certainly is prepared for that, and their patriots are ready.
Here's the Secretary of State.
Essentially advocating for covert regime change through internal destabilization rather than overt regime change through external force. But I'll pose this to you. How many iterations of this exact playbook have we witnessed? How did comparable strategies perform in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan? The notion that you simply remove entrenched leaders, empower some allegedly friendly faction, and watch stable democratic governance emerge organically is contradicted by every recent historical precedent. And those who survived previous Middle East intervention campaigns, both American military personnel and regional civilian populations, would likely testify that limited action possesses an alarming tendency to become unlimited extremely rapidly. Here's why this matters acutely right now. The political dimensions of this crisis are enormous. You've got Trump's Justice Department, Trump's State Department, Trump's Pentagon, all synchronized on Iran's strategy. The Republican political base that elevated Trump has demanded aggressive Iran policy for years. They frame this as enforcing accountability, as preventing nuclear proliferation, as confronting a regime that literally chants death to America. But skepticism exists, even among Trump's core supporters, about entanglement in another Middle Eastern military campaign. They recall the promises about ending perpetual warfare. They remember the costs measured in American lives and Treasury expenditures from Iraq and Afghanistan. So internal tension exists even within Trump's coalition regarding how aggressively to pursue confrontation. Democratic opposition, meanwhile, maintains intense scrutiny. Some worry about precipitous military action bypassing constitutional congressional war powers. Others express concern about prematurely abandoning diplomatic pathways. And some highlight that Trump's first-term withdrawal from the Iran nuclear accord arguably created this current crisis. Israel is actively preparing for major escalation. They've coordinated extensively with Washington on potential target packages, shared critical intelligence, and positioned their military forces anticipating Iranian proxy retaliation. If America strikes Iranian territory, Israeli planners know Hezbollah in Lebanon will almost certainly launch massive rocket barrages southward. Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Gulf monarchies publicly advocate for diplomatic de-escalation, but privately numerous Gulf leaders would welcome degradation of Iranian military capabilities. They simply prefer avoiding immediate blowback consequences. Let me outline 3 plausible scenarios for where this situation heads next, because events are developing at breakneck speed. Scenario Alpha, the Oman discussions somehow generate unexpected progress. Perhaps not a comprehensive treaty, but some interim confidence-building framework. Iran accepts enhanced nuclear program monitoring. America grants limited sanctions relief. Both nations step away from immediate confrontation. This represents the optimal outcome, but given the agenda misalignment we've analyzed, it's probably the least probable scenario. Scenario Beta, negotiations stagnate without complete implosion. We experience continued harassment incidents in contested waters, additional drone provocations, sporadic proxy militia attacks, a gradual escalation pattern, where both governments test boundaries, but neither wants responsibility for igniting full-scale war. This could persist for months, featuring periodic crisis flare-ups.
Up the trash. We don't want to be running that country. We don't want to have so-called regime change. But do you think the intelligence relies with the Israelis? Do you think, since they have identified the generals who to kill, do you think they've identified any politicians who possibly might be compliant?
There are some, and it's incredible to see how Mossad has operated inside Iran and how they're able to pick out targets how they want. But yes, many people talk about Rouhani.
Scenario Gamma. Talks collapse catastrophically. Trump determines Iran isn't negotiating with genuine intent. America executes what officials characterize as calibrated strikes against Iranian military infrastructure, potentially missile production facilities, possibly Revolutionary Guard command centers, maybe even targeted elimination of specific generals or leadership figures. Iran retaliates through proxy networks and potentially direct military action. We enter an attack retaliation cycle where nobody can identify the conflict ceiling. And here's the nightmare scenario keeping defense strategists awake. In scenario Gamma, what if Iran actually attempts closing the Strait of Hormuz completely? What if they replicate their 2019 attacks on Saudi petroleum infrastructure? What if Hezbollah unleashes thousands of precision-guided missiles at Israeli cities, and Israel responds with devastating strikes across Lebanon and Syria? Suddenly you've got multi-nation regional warfare, mass casualty counts, and global economic catastrophe. The Trump administration's strategic assumption appears to be that demonstrated strength and credible threats compel Iranian capitulation. That showing willingness to employ military force brings Tehran to negotiations on American terms. That the Iranian regime suffers sufficient weakness that sustained pressure produces desired outcomes. Iran's strategic assumption appears to be that they can endure American pressure campaigns, that they can impose costs severe enough that Washington won't sustain protracted conflict, and that they can fracture the coalition between America and regional partner nations. One side's fundamental calculation is going to be proven catastrophically wrong. And when that recognition occurs, we'll discover very rapidly whether this situation can be contained within acceptable parameters or whether it detonates into something vastly more destructive. Here's what stands beyond dispute at this moment. The provocative incidents are intensifying. The hostile rhetoric is hardening. The military capabilities are positioned. The diplomatic meetings are scheduled, but the foundational objectives don't align. Both governments believe they possess superior leverage, and the window for peaceful resolution is contracting rapidly. Benjamin Hall offered a prediction on Fox News worth serious consideration. He anticipates the negotiations will fail, and he expects military action to follow that failure. That's not speculation from some random television pundit. That's professional assessment from someone with extensive operational experience in that geographic theatre, making judgments based on observable indicators. The question isn't whether this situation has reached critical severity. Obviously it has. The question is whether rational decision-making can prevail, whether the catastrophic costs of warfare will push both nations toward compromise solutions, or whether we're observing the preliminary stages of another Middle East conflict that nobody genuinely desires, but nobody possesses the wisdom to prevent. Trump's message to Iran was unambiguous. We're going to do really bad things to you. Iran's military provocations suggest they're not displaying fear. The diplomatic talks are scheduled for this Friday in Oman, and the entire international community is watching to determine if this concludes through negotiation or if we're headed somewhere far more dangerous. This narrative is nowhere near conclusion. Where do you think this ends? At the diplomatic table or on the battlefield? Does Trump's confrontational posture force Iranian concessions, or does it push both nations into a war neither economy can sustain? Drop your analysis in the comments section and make sure you're subscribed, because we'll track every emerging development as this crisis unfolds. The coming days could determine whether this gets resolved through diplomacy or whether we're about to witness another catastrophic Middle East crisis with worldwide ramifications.